Hi, everybody. Welcome once again to Great Questions, Great Conversations. It's a podcast that we have here as part of a ministry at St. Paul's in the Bridge in Muskego, Wisconsin. My name is Mike Westendorf. I am the host, and joining us again today is our regular Pastor Pete Panitsky. Pastor Pete, how are you doing?
I am doing great today. It's a beautiful day.
Yeah. We won't tell everybody about the air pollution index, the smoke that I can't see outside,
Yeah,
the highest.
I probably shouldn't sing my song that I sang at Min Team today.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
we'll send out a separate recording. You can ask Eric, and she'll Instagram it to some, and then it'll get lots of views. You'll go viral just like that. But we have been really enjoying the conversations over the last 4 months here. That we've had a number of really good questions that have come in, and then we've had conversations that have come off those. We've got a slate of additional thoughts that we want to jump into. And the whole premise of this podcast has been, when you ask a good question, there really is no such thing as this black and white. We'd all like it to be yes or no. And the only time that you really get that question is when you show up at the drive-thru and they say, "Do you want fries with that?" Then you can have a black and white answer. But anytime we start talking about Christian topics, there are nuances and there's context and there's trying to know your audience. And so what we're trying to do is honor these questions with a little bit more space and time. And certainly we don't endeavor to have all the answers for every scenario. But Pastor Peter, really appreciated a lot of the wisdom that you've been sharing and that we've just been able to do together.
Yeah.
We've got an interesting question that comes in from friends of ours. And it's a good one, and it's going to have to deal with the idea of engagement and marriage and the state. And so I was trying to think about a good place to start. But I think I want to start us with the idea of engagement. Because for some of you who are listening in right now, you might be our generation or older. Engagement and marriage had a certain list of cultural norms and expectations. Then there's the biblical cultural norms and expectations within Christendom. And then there's the culture that we exist in America today. And it's different in other parts of the country. Africa and Asia would have different But within the American context, let's talk a little bit about engagement and marriage and just open that up to your observations first, Pastor Pete.
Yeah. So the question came from somebody who is of my generation. And it reminds me of the conversations we had at the seminary that is engagement tantamount to marriage?
Mm-hmm.
Not that I've ever heard tantamount in any other conversation, but basically is engagement the same as being married? And that goes back to the biblical times when, in the biblical context, Joseph and Mary were married. They were engaged.
The word was espoused, wasn't it? I always wondered what the heck that meant.
Yeah, but they had not come together yet. But he calls, that Mary is called his wife.
Yeah.
Even though they haven't come together yet and lived together as husband and wife, because in that culture, the private promise that you made to each other in engagement was, okay, this means that we are going to be husband and wife. And I think in generations past, in our American culture, that was much more the case. And that's why when I was at the seminary, we had the conversation, is engagement tantamount to marriage? In other words, if you privately promise to somebody, I'm going to be married to you, and you say, nah, I don't want to, that's like breaking a marriage. And I think there's some really good thoughts about that, because in your engagement, you are starting to build your life together.
Right.
You're making plans together, not just plans for the wedding day,
right,
but plans that go way beyond that. And our God wants to protect us. And so I think it would, if I had my druthers, that we would value engagement very highly and say, if I am engaged to you, I am saying we are going to be husband and wife for the rest of our lives. But I think in our culture, engagement has become more like now we're really going steady, and we
Mm,
can be engaged for a long, long time, and maybe not even set a wedding date, which in my generation just would not have happened.
right.
You set the you get engaged, and a week later you have the wedding date set, and everything is poured into getting ready for that wedding date. You know,
Right. I remember the piece of advice growing up. Again, I'm a little younger than you are, but quite a bit older than the generation that's, in their 20s now. But that the idea is, take a longer time in your dating and a shorter engagement. For a number of reasons. And certainly one of them is the physical and sexual reality that comes
mm-hmm.
with that. You want to be together, you're making a commitment. I can even remember being engaged with that being a struggle. And I've talked to other men and women who have said, yeah, the physical intimacy was tough because once we were engaged, it's like we're married. And even today I'll hear people say that, well, it's like we're married. And it's boy, that's that blurring of the lines rather than allowing it to be a season with a real intention and a real purpose. Um, we lose something in that, and I think it becomes dangerous when we don't see that.
Yeah, and in my conversation, email conversation with the original couple who asked the question, I said I think it's really important to go back to the institution of marriage when So what is marriage? Uh, Genesis 2:24. A man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh.
Mm-hmm.
So a man leaves his father and mother as a public announcement that I am no longer having my relationship with my parents as the primary relationship is in my life. I'm united to my wife, and that's what a lifelong vow is I'm glued to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then comes the safe place where we can become one flesh, obviously in the sexual union, but a husband and wife become united in so many different ways.
Right.
And sadly, people jump to the one flesh and start getting united before there is a lifelong commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And then people's lives are shattered because they have built these bonds that were one party didn't expect it to be lifelong, you
Right.
know.
Right.
Um, so a man will leave his father and mother. This is a public announcement. This is one. So often people will say, "Well, we're living together, and it's like you said, it's like we're married." And it's like I I doubt before they live together that they announce to all their family and friends, okay, now this is a permanent relationship.
Right. Right.
My
Right.
guess is they this was a private decision that they made,
Yep.
and they just kind of go, well, people will eventually figure out that we think this is permanent, or maybe it's
I
not.
I would say it's even more. Well, we'll see. It's going really well. So we'll see how it keeps going. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. And it's almost like a wish and a hope, but with no foundation and no real root. It's like I hope it works out, but if it doesn't, we'll just move apart. We'll just move out. And I've been around
And
this long enough to know that, even in the just we're living together phase without an engagement, at least a promise of a commitment without it actually becoming one, that still when those people break up, that union breaks up, it is like a divorce.
exactly. So that our God gives commands not to limit our joy, but to protect us.
Mm,
And there's just something incredible about the sexual union that unites a man and a woman. And it is not God's desire that we trivialize that
Mm-hmm.
and go, well, it's no big deal. No, it is a huge deal.
Right.
And even on these TV programs where people are jumping in and out of bed,
Right.
even the writers of the script recognize, okay, if we brought these two characters together, their relationship will never be the same
Yeah.
because something very special happened.
Mm-hmm.
So even our culture recognizes, sadly, our culture trivializes how painful it is.
Right.
Uh, but even our culture recognizes, boy, there's something special about that, and we should protect it. Is what God is saying.
Yeah.
You protect it by saying, make it public. This isn't something that happens at the back of a car.
Right.
You know,
Yep.
uh, a man leaves his father and mother. He's united to his wife. There's this lifelong mutual pledge to each other. We're going to go through thick and thin to make this work.
Mm-hmm.
And then that is the safe place for intimacy, for building an entire life together.
Yeah.
Because all your hopes and dreams become one, and this is one of the toughest things about divorce. I think is not just that you've lost that relationship with somebody,
Mm-hmm.
but you've lost your future
Right.
because suddenly you have to envision a future that is without the person that you had built it on,
Right.
built it together with.
There's an artist who wrote a song, "Death Without a Funeral." That's the picture of divorce. As the two have become one flesh. I remember a friend of mine was going through cancer treatments, and some of you who are listening and maybe been part of something like this, or this, but they had a port put in for drainage, and so that port is coming out of the skin, but the skin eventually grafts and starts to infuse that in. And my friend told me that the most painful thing out of all the surgeries and everything else was getting that port removed because of how the body had incorporated it into itself. And
Mm,
so the cutting out of that port was just excruciatingly painful. And
wow.
that's what divorce is. And I go a step further. This is the thing. And again, pride goes before the fall. I we are all capable of making the kinds of mistakes and the sins and the self-centeredness that can ruin and end our marriages. So I am not saying this as just, hey, well, we've got it all figured out. But I've observed that when people don't take dating and engagement seriously and use it for what it's appropriate, I think that very much so our culture goes right to the physical intimacy because we desire that so strongly. And I think guys have a different picture of what that intimacy feels and looks like, and women have a different, and but that if you misuse the time for dating, which is really the asking of the questions and the getting to know of, and that engagement, Ben Stewart kind of writes about it as it's the beginning of starting to pull life together.
Mm,
And as you pull, like two magnets get pulled closer together, sometimes they attract, but sometimes they repulse. And so there can be a tension in there. It's a space for you're moving out of evaluation toward commitment. And when we misuse these and we jump into physical, we say, oh, yes, this is the one. And then, well, we're like divorce. If it doesn't work out, it's okay. Not realizing that the collateral damage goes way beyond you. So why are all these old people, concerned about my marriage? Why do my mom and dad care? Why do my friends care about what's happening? And because we all stood up there and witnessed and agreed that we would pray for you and be there for you to help you see this through, but that the pain that comes out, it's not just going to be tied to the two of you.
mm,
It's going to go way outside that and bring kids into it.
mm.
There's just a lot of healing that's going to need to happen and a lot of grace. And it's not the intention that God designed. So fight for it.
Right.
And it's easier to fight for it if you use engagement for what it's intended to be.
Yeah. And you're touching on something that many of our listeners have gone through divorce.
Exactly. Yep.
And the last thing I want to do is leave you overwhelmed with a sense of guilt
Right.
that we are all sinful human beings and are acceptable in God's sight, not because we have made perfect decisions in the past
Mm-hmm.
or even right now. We are God's children, beloved sons and daughters of God, because God the Father has had his son die in our place.
Yeah.
I am a saint. I am absolutely pure and holy because I am forgiven. And that's
Mm-hmm.
true for every one of us. And when we look back and go, could have done something different there, should have done something different there, rather
Mm-hmm.
than letting define you and defeat you, that you say, okay, I appreciate God's forgiveness in a new way.
Yeah.
And I have learned some of the things that I want to do differently moving forward
Yep.
in my relationships moving forward. Yeah. One of the things, it was this year that I read through the Bible every year. So I've
Right.
read Psalm 18 many, many times. And I always thought Psalm 18 must be written early in King David's life, because in Psalm 18, he talks about his integrity.
Mm.
And I'm going,
Yeah.
what a schnook. How can he talk about his integrity? He was an adulterer and a murderer.
Right.
Uh, but this year I read it and I went, he could write that at the end of his life too, because his sin did not define him.
Yeah.
Our lowest points, our weakest, most horrible mistakes do not define who we are. God didn't refer to King David as the adulterer and murderer. He talked about King David
Mm-hmm.
as a man after his own heart.
Yep.
Long after David's gone, he
Right.
talked about David as a man. He was a man after my own heart.
Yep.
God's view of King David was not the worst time of his life.
Right.
It was, he is my forgiven child. And I pray that every one of us can claim that grace, especially when we're talking about sexual areas, because it just so powerfully impacts our view of ourselves. And we can define ourselves by our sins and our mistakes. It's like, no,
Right.
that's not how God defines
Yeah.
you. You're his child.
For our listeners, it just as an additional thing of context. So thank you for going there. I work with a lot of young adults, and so part of what you hear in me is the passion for our young people, because I've been in a number of Bible studies. We talk about this quite a bit, fighting for them to try to do it God's way. And I'm 26 years into marriage, but I know the temptations. I know the failures that come. I know some of those tensions. We've been very blessed. My wife is very gracious, and so for those who might be struggling to stay in it,
Mm-hmm.
to encourage people to fight for it. But I have so many friends who have gone through divorce. Some people who were whose sin was a primary cause, but for other people it was not, and it was important for them to get out of that. But yet this wasn't God's intent for what marriage is to be. We live in a sinful world, and so when you talk about Psalm 18, I went to and turned to it, and the NIV, the Bible writers put in some information in it that this is early on, Psalm 18, and in David's writing, because he's delivered from the hand of Saul. But as a songwriter, it's weird to me that I've written a song and like I wrote it for a particular season and for a particular reason. And then I go through a hard time. And then like one of my kids or a friend will send it to me and say, hey, I know you're dealing with some stuff, but you need to shut your mouth for a little bit and listen to this song. And then they forward me one of my own songs, which really
Yeah,
ticks me off.
yeah, right.
Like, well, what did that kid know? He doesn't know what I know now. And to your point about God's mercies being new and forgiveness experienced in a new way. So really grateful that you bring us there. And so Pastor Pete is older than me, and he has seen the whole counsel of things. And so that's for all of you listening in, that's why you get a chance to get
Uh,
both of our perspectives
well,
at times.
and the reason why I ahaed about Psalm 18
Yeah.
is it is one of the Psalms that's quoted in 2 Samuel chapter 22. That is at the end of the King David account. The
Mm-hmm.
very next chapter is entitled David's Last Words. So,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so there are about four psalms that are included in Second Samuel 22 portions of it, and it was like I'm reading at the end of David's life, and I'm reading, where is it? I can't. I just had it, but this whole idea of the Lord has dealt with me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands, He has rewarded me.
And he's writing this at the end of his life. This is coming up.
Yeah,
Dude, have you forgotten?
yeah, and that's when it just dawned on me that God did not define David's life, and David, God doesn't want us to define our lives by our worst possible moment.
Yeah.
Boy, that was a huge aha.
Yeah. So please, everybody.
That only came after reading the Bible about 45 times. So
Yeah. And
there's
and
always more to learn.
so please, listeners, hear that, whether you're in a marriage in good standing or where you're praying for one or whether it's been a journey. Please hear. Could you say that one more time? I love God doesn't see me in my worst.
He doesn't define me by my worst moments. He defines me by His grace for me. I'm a
Yeah.
child of God, and that's what I can claim. You know, I'm not the horrible sinner that I so often depict myself as. No, God sees me as a forgiven saint.
Yeah. There's another aspect of this that I think is worth addressing. And then maybe we can do a quick recap as we wind this down. But one of the questions was, and the objections, of course, we are in just in a very polarized, very disunified United States. And so one of the things that people don't like is, well, I don't like the state. I don't like Big Brother. I don't like being observed by Google or my phone. It's amazing. Like you and I can talk about Pizza Hut, and I just type P into Google and then boom, Pizza Hut is the first thing there. It's like, you're listening to me. So nobody wants to be defined by stuff. And one of them is the state. And so we want to be married in our own eyes without the state being involved. How do you respond to that? And can a pastor actually view that as a marriage in that space? That was part of the question, and I'd never really thought about it that way. And I just thought, I think I do know people who have been in this common, what do they call it?
Common law marriage.
Common law marriage,
Yeah, and some states do recognize common law marriages. That I think it's Texas, that if you live together for 7 years, that's you're considered married. That legally can be considered husband and wife.
And
I don't know
is that for protection, do you think?
I don't know all the ins and outs of it.
Okay.
But actually, members of the congregation explained that to me. Obviously, the weakness of that is, my guess is, people who entered a common law marriage did not again announce to mom and dad, "Hey, mom and dad, we're going to be husband and wife. It'll take us 7 years. The ceremony will take 7 years, but we are married, and we're sticking it out." My guess is many common law marriages started with we're just moving in together, and pretty soon it's like, well, we've stuck it out for 7 years. Guess what? We're married.
Right. Right.
But for for us as Christians, it's just interesting. We're talking about this right now, is right around the 4th of July,
Hmm.
because as Christians, we believe that the state has a function, and we honor the state by obedience. And the state may have flaws, but how do we honor the state? And how do we honor all the people involved in it? The reason why the government says, I want you to get a marriage license is I want you to really understand that you are entering into a binding agreement here, and we're going to protect each other. Husband and wife are being protected. And as the rest of the family, you know, is this person a part of our family for the rest of our lives, or is this a boyfriend or girlfriend that's going to be here this time, and next time never mention this person's name?
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, let us know. And you are being respectful. Not, oh, I must do this because no, it's I don't. I want to do this to show my respect for my government and to do all that I can to hold up marriage as something that's pure and holy and wonderful.
Yeah. Do you have a legal reality as a officiant, as a pastor?
Yeah, what's hilarious is uh, when it says right on there, if we don't fill this out, if we don't send it in, we're going to be fined as pastors. We ask for the marriage license on the night of the rehearsal because legally we are not to conduct the ceremony without the license in hand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and so don't ask your pastor, hey, could you just marry us without a marriage license? Because you're asking him to break the law. Now, is this something that he's going to be thrown into prison for the rest of his life? No, but it still doesn't mean that you should be asking somebody to go against what the government says.
Right. Okay. I didn't know that. I was
Yeah,
kind of curious,
yeah.
because yeah, you have to be officially licensed as an officiant, or like.
It, and now this is what's odd in Wisconsin, though you don't have to be an officially licensed.
Okay.
Anybody can perform the ceremony in Wisconsin now.
Hmm.
Didn't used to be that way. But if you were performing the ceremony, then you are the officiant and you have the responsibility. The couple doesn't have the responsibility. You have the responsibility to get the marriage license to the county clerk.
Interesting.
Yeah. And if you don't have signatures, they don't send it back to the couple. They send it back to you as an officiant.
Hmm.
Um, I've had one where now they said we can't read this signature. And we can't read their printing either. What is the best man's name? They don't ask the bride and groom. They ask me as the officiant. And
Okay.
I looked at it and went, oh, I don't remember his name either. So I had to reach back out to the couple.
Yeah.
But it's our responsibility as the one who's doing the ceremony
Okay.
to fulfill that legal document. And it's a legal document. I mean, we are as an officiant, you are acting as a
Representative of the state.
servant of the state.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Okay. That's interesting. As we kind of um wind down, I'd love for you mentioned the old school way that you learned about it, tantamount to an
Yeah.
engagement, but to just maybe give a Christian explanation of the dating, engagement, marriage process. What is the value of that? Why is that important? And why is it good for us to honor the way that God has laid some of that out?
Yeah, like I said, I think if we always go back to the institution of marriage, and Jesus did, right?
Yeah,
You know,
he did.
when the Pharisees asked him about marriage,
Right.
and is divorce permitted? Jesus said, Moses regulated divorce because of the hardness of your heart, but that's
Right.
not the way it was from the beginning. And then he quotes Genesis 2:24.
Right.
So a man will leave his father and mother. What you're looking for somebody who will become the most important person in your life. And what is dating? Dating is just starting to learn to understand yourself and understand the person that you are interested in. So that's good,
It's
but don't make
the evaluating process is
yeah,
what
but
dating is meant to be. Yeah.
yeah, but don't jump into becoming one flesh, because then you are uniting yourself in a way that will be incredibly damaging if the relationship doesn't work out.
Right.
So God's protecting us. And I would encourage couples when they get engaged to be thinking in terms of, we are absolutely certain we're going to be a husband and wife. And now we're starting to build our plans, our future together. And it's a solid foundation for our future together.
Why do we wait for the physical intimacy then?
Because in our that's a great question, because uh, in our culture, we publicly announce to the world we are husband and wife in the marriage ceremony. Honestly, if you wanted to get engaged, and you know, in years past, we were always saying this. It's like, if you want the big ceremony 6 months from now or a year from now, just go. Let's have a private ceremony. That's easy. If you are truly saying we are united as husband and wife for the rest of our lives, and we want to become intimate,
Mm-hmm.
then let's do the marriage right now, and then you can have the big celebration sometime later.
And it's interesting that COVID actually has made that happen
Yeah,
far
yeah.
more
For
commonly than would ever hear before.
yeah, for about a year, we had a lot of renewal of vows, right,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or ratification of vows, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
But if you're waiting, if you're allowing for a stretch of time between the engagement and publicly making that commitment, the purpose of um, that engagement period.
This is where I'm countercultural.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I you had said it. I'm not sure if I think you said it before we started recording,
Yeah.
Mike. That make the dating time long and the engagement very short.
Yeah. That's
You
the
know,
advice was given to me.
yeah. If you are, don't get engaged until you're sure that this is the person you want to spend the rest of your life with,
Mm-hmm.
and then plan the marriage and get married, because otherwise you're just setting yourself up for too much temptation,
Yep.
and too much guilt. God wants us to enjoy the marvelous gift of intimacy, and you know, as a husband and wife, you're praising God in that point.
Yeah.
And how many people are feeling guilty because their conscience says this isn't quite right. This isn't quite right.
Right.
Just get married.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's kind of like kids in some respects. It's like, I remember that was when we were expecting our kids. That was when the what to expect when you're expecting books were so popular.
Oh, right.
And like somehow you were going to read a book and you were just going to know how this whole thing was going to go. And it's like it gave you these really nice specifics, that were actually more generalizations as you went from, we had 3 kids, so none of them were all the same, but we knew generally what was happening. And, marriage sometimes the same. It's like, well, I think we're ready now. And it's, even God's like, don't worry about tomorrow. Today has enough. You just walk
Yeah.
with me today, and I'll be there tomorrow with you when you get to tomorrow.
Mm.
But let's just grow together today, with Christ as a foundation. And I like the way that you said that too, that God intends, the 10 commandments. You can look at it, the 10 do nots, but it's really the 10 do's. There's the boundary lines, and inside those boundary lines is this great blessing that is there, and God wants you to experience that.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the term boundary lines because the way our congregation is organized, we talk about boundaries. So the ministry board sets boundaries that as a ministerial team leader, I have to stay within those boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, I've got lots of flexibility within those boundaries.
Yeah.
Don't do anything scripturally wrong. Don't do anything that will harm the unity of the congregation. Keep focused on the mission of our congregation. But boy, there's a lot of flexibility within that.
Yeah.
And that's true for us as Christians too. The 10 Commandments are just boundaries trying to protect us from what's outside the boundaries that are going to be harmful for us. But boy, inside we've got lots of time to and things to enjoy.
And Psalm 19 is one of my favorite ones. Whenever I was teaching the 5th commandment, and I try to remind people that the psalmist says, the boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. And I just love the picture that the place in between the boundary lines is pleasant, and there's something good coming up at the end of this thing too, the inheritance. And just, that's the way that God wants us to understand why his laws are in place. He knows how humanity was wired. He knows how he wired you and how it relates to other people. Like you said, when we go and smash ourselves on the boundary lines, like you can break yourself to pieces just trying to run and, beat yourself up against that rock and crash it and get on the other side of it. Sometimes it seems like there's stuff that happens from the outside in a sinful world. Somebody lobs some slushy snowball and it hits us in the face and ruins our pleasant place. But God is still there, and he's working through all of it for his glory and the delightful inheritance that's coming. So this has been good. I hope for those of you who have been wondering about this question on engagement and marriage and some of the legal stuff that this was helpful for you. Any closing thoughts, Pastor Pete?
Just recognizing that when I'm speaking God's word, that's one thing. Some of these things, what my druthers for the term engagement, mm-hmm. I'm not speaking for God saying this is what engagement must be in our culture.
Right.
It's cultural norms are different, but the whole idea of public, lifelong commitment, and then the sexual union. And I think if you keep those three, that order, that will help you as you kind of sort through all of these things. And does my boyfriend or girlfriend think of engagement the same way? Well, definition of that word isn't important. What's important is the progression from Genesis 2:24.
That's great. Awesome. Well, you are listening to great questions, great conversations. Thank you for our listeners who sent in this set of questions. It has been a wonderful topic and a great conversation. If you have questions, if there are some things within the span of Christianity that you've always wondered about, or that has been confusing to you, and that you'd like to see some clarity, we will do our best to have that conversation. And again, we can't promise here's everything on that topic, but we hope that will help in your journey as you wrestle with some of these topics as well. For St. Paul's and the Bridge here at Muskego, I am Mike Westendorf. This is Pastor Pete, and we will see you again next time.